SecureFreedomRadio.org today. It's your freedom, it's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.
Welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Bill Gertz filling in for Frank Gaffney, who's in Israel and will be back next week. Our next guest is Colonel Robert S. Spalding III of the U.S. Air Force. He's a military fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and his most recent assignment was commander of the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base. That's where our B-2 bombers are based. Welcome to the program, Colonel.
Thank you so much, and hello to everyone out there. I just want to make one clarification. I was a vice commander, not the commander, and these are all going to be my personal opinions, not representative of the Air Force necessarily. Understood.
You recently wrote a piece that talked about the importance of nuclear weapons, and we're facing a situation, Representative Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Armed Services Strategic Forces Subcommittee, gave a speech recently where he said that our nuclear forces are in urgent need of modernization and that funding for that modernization is about $1 billion short. From your view, up close and personal with the nuclear deterrent forces, how do you see the status of our nuclear deterrent forces right now and what needs to be done to maintain them?
Well, I would say that they're strong, but the reason I wrote the particular piece is because I felt that, at least in the foreign policy circles, that maybe there was a little bit of misunderstanding of what the necessity of nuclear weapons were to our national defense, and it seemed like we needed some education in that area.
Yeah, you made the point in your article that nuclear weapons are actually weapons of peace, and that this is an element of peace through strength, which certainly we at the Center for Security Policy and Secure Freedom Radio, that's one of our key elements, that if you want to prevent conflict, you need to be strong, and certainly that we need a strong nuclear deterrent force for that. What about this Global Zero campaign that seems to have gained a lot of attention in recent months? The idea that we can just give up our nuclear weapons. Obviously, the Obama administration's position, the president himself said he'd like to get rid of all nuclear weapons, but also recognize that as long as there are nuclear weapons, we're going to need a good nuclear force. What's your take on the Global Zero movement?
Well, I think one thing that happened after the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of Strategic Air Command, I think we lost sight of the fact that nuclear weapons are still an important part of our national security. For instance, coming from the B-2, it goes anywhere from going after terrorists like Osama bin Laden to limited strikes like in Libya to air wars like Kosovo to full conflict like the Iraq invasion, and all the way to nuclear deterrence. And each of those situations requires somewhat different forces. Like maybe going after terrorists require special ops. Limited strikes requires the Air Force or Navy, and big combat requires the conventional forces. In addition, we require nuclear forces for deterrence, and we saw that especially with the rhetoric that's coming out of North Korea earlier. So it's an essential part of our national defense. Just like the Special Forces guys will tell you, they're not the end-all, be-all, but they are important and useful when needed. And I think our nuclear forces play a different role than special ops or the conventional forces, but it's a vital role.
Absolutely. We need those nuclear forces to deter, to make it clear to any adversary that they would be making a huge strategic miscalculation. In light of that, these adversaries, one adversary or potential adversary that's building up their nuclear forces is the People's Republic of China. We've seen pretty large-scale buildup, largely in the background. There's very little transparency. I noticed that you have some expertise in this area. What do you think the purpose of the Chinese strategic nuclear buildup is?
Well, I think it's the same as any country that has nuclear weapons. It is to assure that their sovereignty is not challenged. One of the things that I see now, and I get a lot of questions about, is what are the Chinese capabilities? What are our capabilities vis-a-vis the Chinese? And there seems to be this kind of underlying belief that we are headed for conflict with the Chinese, and I think that would, on many levels, be a mistake. Our nuclear force provides a great measure of deterrence for any type of conflict, and I made that point in the op-ed. One that the nuclear forces provided that level of deterrence for the Soviets when the Cold War was raging, and as a result, we enjoyed peace when I think there was a lot of people that felt that there was a possibility for a conflagration. It never occurred, and that's because nuclear weapons provide a threshold and a level of violence between two like-armed enemies or combatants.
We're talking with Colonel Robert Spalding. Colonel, another area that's interesting is the Russian nuclear buildup. I'm sure that one of the recent strategy documents that was put out by the Pentagon made the point that we're no longer adversaries with Russia, but on the other hand, it does seem like the Russians are engaged in a fairly significant strategic nuclear buildup across the board. They're building new ICBMs, they're building new ballistic missile submarines, as are the Chinese. How do you see what's going on with the Russians there in terms of bolstering their nuclear forces?
I can't say exactly what their intent is, but the result is a credible force that needs to be reckoned with and needs to be dealt with seriously. And the way we do that, the way we do it every single day, our Air Forces and Navy forces, is to be constantly ready, and that will continue to be the case. As is in the nuclear posture review, that those forces need to be ready up until the point where there is no nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, I don't see any mechanism by which that may take place in the future. In other words, I don't see a future where any nation out there is willing to unilaterally disarm, and so that means that they continue to be relevant, and if they're relevant, it requires that we continue to upgrade them, modernize them, and make sure that they have all the resources they need to continue to do the mission.
We're talking with Colonel Robert Spalding in the Council on Foreign Relations, a military fellow. In your article in the Washington Post recently, you talked about the idea that the perceived march toward complete nuclear disarmament, using phrases for as long as nuclear weapons exist, weakens the very thing that ensures the peaceful future. And you talked about the fact that the idea that we only need these weapons until we can get rid of them is potentially harming the morale of the troops that are charged with defending the country in the use of these nuclear weapons. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think, again, to go back to my earlier comments, from my standpoint in the B-2 community, I see that there is a lot of attention paid to this special ops forces, conventional forces, while there has been recent attention to the nuclear forces based on the prior incidents we had in the forces. I think that there is a potential for that to lapse, and it's because I think that there's just an ongoing ignorance, I guess, about what the necessity is for nuclear weapons. Again, because I think people see the Cold War has ended, that they're no longer required, but they do have a relevance that continues and will continue for the foreseeable future. That's kind of the issue that I think that we're having now.
We've been talking with Colonel Robert Spalding, the former Vice Commander of the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base. Colonel, thanks very much for being on the program.
Thank you so much.
This is Bill Gertz filling in for Frank Gaffney on Secure Freedom Radio. We thank you for listening, and please tune in again next time.